Welcome everyone to the Cortado Cuppa Coffee Podcast with me, your host Tom Dillon. This has been recorded live at our Tin Pot mobile studio and broadcast around the world. Before I start talking about UK property prices, which is the main topic for today, just wanted to do a very quick shout out to the wonderful Paul Landfair, who's agreed to come and speak to us in a few days' time on the 4th of January 2025 at our sort of a live online Cuppa event that we have. So if you've never come along to one before, that would be an excellent one to come to, because Paul's great, and the topic of the year, given the time of year, right at the very start, is to set us all on the right path, to set us up for having a successful 2025. If you're thinking to yourself, for you that's in the past, which it might well be for quite a lot of you, especially if you're listening in the year 2819, which point you have a lot of podcast listening to catch up with, unless this is the only one that survived, in which case, welcome to the only podcast that survived. Then survived the event. Then the podcast still exists. Paul, unless this is the only podcast that still exists, at which point Paul's doesn't exist, and you just take it from me that it's great. Although for me it's in the future, so it might not be. I don't know if it's great, but it probably will be. It's getting a bit long, this, isn't it? Right. In short, listen to that podcast, or come and join the meeting, or don't. Those are your three options. Christ, this is convoluted even for me, isn't it? With the normal level of preparation that goes into one of these, absolutely none. I've looked into a few bits around UK property prices. The thrust of my video today will be, in case you're a headline memo kind of person, that as a professional property investor, of course, people do things differently, so some people will completely disagree with that, and that is, of course, part of the fun. But for me, at least, and I think lots of people I speak to, which is quite a lot doing this podcast, most professional property investors aren't that fussed about the sort of day-to-day noise of what's going on with UK property prices. Oh, it's up 0.1%, oh, it's down 0.2%. Doesn't really affect what I do, what we do, that much. And that's over the short term. Long-term trends long-term trends do make a difference. So, for example, the fact that property prices have doubled or more since roughly 2012, which was 2011, 2012, which is when I started, that matters. It would be a big difference in the market if property prices halved versus doubled is a big deal. But the fact that they're up 3.8% or 2.8% or down 1.8% over the last 6 to 12 months doesn't make much odds day to day, and I'll explain why. But before I do, so that's the headline memo. In order to have a look at what's going on, I thought, well, I've never really done a kind of Google search for UK property prices, what's going on in the last year, and looked at the two housing price indexes, which I was vaguely aware of until I spent a little bit of time this morning. Nationwide and Halifax both have house price indexes, which you can look at, and we'll have a squint at. But if I give you a sense of it, I quite like the Guardian newspaper. I don't pay them money, and maybe I should, but so this is an article from them. And by the way, other newspapers are available and will probably print similar stuff. If I just read out a tiny bit of this article, I'm not sure if I need to pay them royalties at this point. If I do, I'll probably take down the podcast. So there we go. Or I'll pay them royalties, depending on which it is. Experts have predicted a buyer's market for house hunters in the year ahead, giving them greater negotiating power as the mood of the housing market shifts to cautious optimism. So far, I'm already lost. I don't know what any of it means. A buyer's market. All right, let's focus on some words. Buyer's market means cheap, right? That's what we're talking about. It's going to be cheap. Okay. Next paragraph. However, even the more hopeful expectations for 2025 were met with caution, as an important stamp duty relief for first-time buyers was scheduled to end in the spring, as well as potentially high interest rates and taxes bearing down on the market. Well, hang on. Stamp duty relief ends means people buy stuff right before it ends, so that's going to lead to more buying, so therefore prices rising. Okay. Potentially higher interest rates, that means people don't buy because they can't afford to, so that means lower buying, and then taxes bearing down the market is also people don't buy. Okay, well that seems like a mixed message, and I'm confused again. Anisha Beveridge, great name, head of research at the property company Hamptons, said they always have Hamptons on these things. Hamptons and Foxtons have got great media teams, it seems to me, because they always appear on these articles. As the end of 2024 approaches, the mood of the housing market has shifted from trepidation to cautious optimism. Great, that sounds like a word salad. I don't know what any of that means. That means trepidation, cautious optimism. Okay, trying to get something useful out of this. That means people are buying more, right? We're back to buyer's market, cautious optimism. Okay, lower mortgage rates have been the principal catalyst for change. Lower mortgage rates. Okay, so that means people are buying again. It's a buyer's market, right? Cheap buyer's market. Falling much more rapidly than we had expected. House prices are moving upwards, all right, makes sense, reversing the declines of 2023. Yet while the future direction of interest rates seems to have been mapped out, the pace of this journey and its ultimate destination remain uncertain. Well, of course they do. It always is. That's the nature of the future, isn't it? There's no future in which the pace of the journey with anything and its ultimate destination remain certain. So that's absolute nonsense as well. As you can tell, I'm getting frustrated by an article where I'm not sure, and it carries on like this, I won't read all of it, but it carries on like that. By all means, read the article, the title of which is UK Property Will Be a Buyer's Market in 2025, analysts predict. So, okay, great. But that seemed like a lot of words, and I'm not sure what's actually going on. So at that point, I gave up and checked a few other things. So I looked at the nationwide house price index, or tried to. I found it very difficult to find anything useful on it. Eventually, I found a very small graph, which for those watching I'll show, and for those listening I'll explain. Here it is. Very small graph, which I can't make bigger, which shows annual percentage change to UK's house prices. And this was buried a little bit. I found the nationwide house price index quite difficult to use and quite difficult to sort of find. There wasn't a nice, easy, broken down report, which is what I was expecting to find. And this shows house prices going up quite quickly, sort of post-COVID. This graph starts November 21. And then the house annual percentage change in UK house prices is what's written along the top. And that shows house prices are going up, albeit more slowly, and then eventually declining from February 23 to about February 24. And it's very, very slowly rising around the rest of the year. In short, not a massive change, but going up and then going down and then going up again. It's like, okay, great. That's what's going on with that graph. And you can tell by my dismissive tone, it's like, Tom, isn't this the very lifeblood of your business, like what property prices are doing? And that's got my overarching point, which, of course, I'm sort of butchering and not putting across very well. But if I kind of dip back into that, because I remember when I started in property investing, doing some training courses, which, by the way, everyone should do. Check out bestpropertymentoring.com for some mentoring with us. Well, after this, maybe you think, guy doesn't know what property prices are. Why am I listening to him? But at the start of that, the wonderful Simon Zucchi, I was on a course with him and others, but this one sticks out. He said there's some fundamentals in UK property, which are that it's an island with limited size. It's got government, which, whatever colour the rosette, doesn't really want to build that much, and certainly doesn't want to build on greenbelt land and national parks and things. So you've got constraints there on the number of units you can build. And you have solid property laws, which mean that, and land rights, which mean that if you own a property in the UK and somebody comes to live in it against your will, against the law, they will eventually be kicked out. That sounds pretty basic, but is not the case in a lot of parts of the world. If you think of lots of places, you can imagine a good sort of mental test to do in your head is if you bought somewhere in country X and then left for 10 years and then came back, would that property still be yours? And even if it's yours on paper, would you actually be able to assert ownership of it? And in the UK, the answer is yes. It might be a bit of a pain, and it might take a while. It might be expensive, but that would still be your house, flat, whatever. Those three factors together mean that long-term property prices in the UK tend to go up. There are other factors as well, of course, but those are maybe the most important ones. Lack of natural disasters helps too. So you put all the factors together, you've got a property market which, on average, doubles between every 7 and 9 years. And that's the important stuff. The rest of this, what speed, or how quickly the line jiggles upwards or downwards or whatever it's doing, for me and for lots of other property investors, is less important. That would be another. I've already done it once, but that's a second summary of the point of this video. All right, so I found another. Back into the minutiae that doesn't really matter. Property transactions. I found another graph here from on the Nationwide site, and what comes out of this, for those listening, is you've got a bunch of spikes, which are caused by governments changing taxes on things. And what occurs to me looking at this graph is, please, government, stop changing taxes on things, because it creates such a massive amount of work and spikes in the market. And I'm sure it's not like this, but it really reminds me of spikes in blood sugar you might get if you were a diabetic person, and or even a non-diabetic person eating too much sugar. It just looks unhealthy. Like, just leave the market alone, please. Having said that, I'm being a bit facetious, because if the market's broken or needs tweaking, or the government needs to raise money for taxes, then you're going to get these spikes like this. But that's the thing I learned from this this graph. There was a big spike in 2016 where it says the introduction of higher rate stamp duty rates for second properties. A big spike for originally announced end of stamp duty land tax holiday in around 2021. The second one right really close to that, for the end of extension for home movers and buy-to-let, etc., etc., etc. But by and large, there's around about 100,000 UK monthly residential property transactions in the UK. And that's still the case at the most recent point, where it's 100,410 is listed. So that's that graph. Then I went over to the dark side, or the good side, which was Halifax. And I found their house price index much easier to find and much easier to sort of upload. And it more or less was exactly what I was expecting for nationwide. So for any new investors, I would very much recommend looking at the Halifax one for usability and ease of finding a report. I think they could bring them out quarterly, is the impression I get. And their words made a lot more sense as well. So they said, a couple of paragraphs here says, latest figures continues to show improving levels of demand for mortgages as an easing in mortgage rates boost buyer confidence. However, despite these positive trends, many potential buyers and movers still face significant affordability challenges. Affordability challenges, it took me ages to work out what that means. It means that people don't earn enough money to buy the house. So affordability means simply your income doesn't mean you're not earning enough to be able to afford whatever it is. Buyers and movers still face significant affordability challenges, and buyer confidence may be tested against a changeable economic backdrop. It's still a lot of words in it. As we move towards the end of the year and into 2025, positive employment figures and anticipated decreases in interest rates are expected to continue supporting demand. So that means, again, it's going to be more buyers, therefore higher prices. This should underpin further house price growth, albeit at a modest pace, as borrowing costs remain above the average of a few years ago. See, that makes a lot more sense to me. Welcome everyone else's thoughts. And there's a nice graph of house prices rising since November 23, just going gradually upwards. So that's what's happened. If the house title of this podcast is "What's Going on with House Prices," gently rising currently. Brackets, doesn't really matter. I wanted to finish by hopefully having nailed that one, knocked that one out of the park, showing why I don't think it really matters. And that's because I think that what really matters is, what are you paying for what you get? So there's a big difference between people investing in large houses in central London in order to make them very, very nice, or extend them and then sell them on. That's a very different model from someone like myself, who typically does various different things. But one of the things I do is buy slightly knocked about houses in cheap and cheerful areas, do modest refurbs to make them nice and solid and durable and good places to live, and then rent them out long term. And so I've fired up here, for those listening to the podcast, I've fired up a property I was looking at. I didn't end up buying it in the end, but it's now sold. So I've fired up one that's sold so that no one can come in and steal it from me, because it's already been sold to somebody else, presumably, namely a house in Farnworth. And the guide price on this, I don't know what it's sold for, but let's just imagine it's sold for the guide price. So it sold for £110,000. Well, whether or not the average house price even in the Northwest is, I think it's about 280 grand or whatever it is, whether or not that's gone up or down 3% in the last year, it doesn't make any difference to my buying decision on this house in Farnworth. What makes a difference to my buying decision on this house is the numbers on this house, the analysis I can do on this house, or whichever house you're looking at, to decide, do I make a decent return on this investment, or do I meet the criteria I have for investing, whatever those criteria might be? And if the answer is yes, then buy it. And if the answer is no, then don't buy it. But don't think to yourself, oh crikey, I would buy it, but property prices have gone down 1.8% in the last 3 months, and it looks dodgy for the next year, so therefore I won't buy it. That's sort of a very short-term view for a very long-term investment, in my case. If you were buying in central London and it said in order to flip it, so you're going to look to realise your cash in the next 12 months, and property prices in London are going to go down 10% in that time, well, that needs to be factored into your numbers, because that suddenly becomes an important factor, that short-term goal. But if, like me, you're planning to hold for many years, then a short-term price fluctuation doesn't make much difference. And I mention this simply to back up the fact that when I'm looking at this house or any other house or any investment, the short-term property price changes don't make much difference and don't help me. They're not a useful factor. They're not something that can help me to make that investment decision. Whereas something like how much is the new boiler going to cost because this house might need a new boiler, that's an important number. Whereas what a property price is doing now, not that important, because I know that long term the fundamentals I mentioned earlier mean that unless those fundamentals change, chances are long term it's going to be fine. I'll finish with an example, a real life example, that in 2013 I genuinely had a couple of sleepless nights, and I usually sleep pretty well, thinking about whether to increase my offer on a house from 59,000 to 62,000 roughly, because someone had come in and given an increased offer, but the agent had made it clear the seller still wanted to sell to me, and if I could match it at 62,000 they would sell to me. And of course, this could all have been noise. They could have invented this other buyer. Absolutely could have been the case. But what was also the case was I had a weekend to decide. They wanted to say for me Monday morning, do I want to increase to 62 or not? And I decided in the end to increase, and I bought the house. But that was a genuine. That's like 4 or 5% increase in price, right? And that makes a big difference to my numbers. And I was quite experienced at the time, so I didn't. A lot of this was based on guesswork, so I was having to use my best judgment, and I didn't have that much money. Like every few £100 really made a difference, and so £3,000 certainly made a massive difference. And I decided to buy it, and of course it could have gone badly wrong, right? The whole thing could have fallen into a hole in the ground. So it's not definitely the nature of risk. It's not definitely a good news story. But in this case, the house is now worth over 200 grand, and so that £3,000 looks like chump change, like small beer, like a very small amount of money. And it is in the scheme of that. But at the time, you'll be facing decisions like this, and what I'm not advising. None of this constitutes any sort of advice. But what I'm saying is worth thinking about is that's a good euphemism for advice, isn't it? Is worth thinking about is not to let small changes and short-term numbers get in the way of more important things long term, which is fundamentals and criteria that really are going to affect your buying decisions. I think that's it. Don't forget to come to. Hope that's been useful. Welcome comments, feedback, suggestions. Don't forget to come to Paul Lamphier's session on Saturday the 4th of January 2025, and if that's in the past for you, then do have a listen to the podcast or watch on YouTube. See you in the next one.